Hi everyone, it's Trishna. Happy Saturday. If you're watching this on replay, go ahead and say hi. I'll say hi after I'm done with this video. I'll still be responding even if you put comments in the replay. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope your Saturday is going awesome. Mine is so far. I have a really interesting topic to talk to you about. We're going to be talking about the Akashic Records. And this was actually a question that my aunt asked me. My aunt is very much into the psychic realm and the spiritual realm, and she is significantly more psychic than she knows that she is, and she's really interested in a lot of these topics. So she is the inspiration for this video. And I have received some other video topic ideas. I am going to be addressing all of them. They may not happen as a next set of videos. The reason for that is because I feel like there are some foundational items that I want to talk about first. Like, I think a lot of people get tripped up on the psychic or spiritual path for a lot of different reasons. I feel like there are a lot of different rules that we start to take on, that we start believing are true, that I want to help you break out of if those are some of the rules that you're living by, because they're probably putting some blocks on your path to really making the spiritual and psychic journey pretty seamless, pretty easy. Of course, there's going to be ups and downs. It is a journey, but I think some people struggle with it because there are a lot of mental rules that they've been taught or they heard of that they embodied that don't really serve them. So I will be addressing your topics. So if you have any ideas or anything that you would like me to talk about, please put them in the comment below or let me know, and they will be addressed. It's just that I'm putting things together in a certain flow to really hit those fundamentals, those foundational items. Because like with the Tower card, which I like to talk about in my videos, the Tower card and Tarot, you really want to make sure that the foundation that you set is really good, really healthy, really strong, doesn't have any kind of cracks in it. Because then when you build upon it, you want to make sure that everything you build upon it is stable. And if you start with a faulty foundation, then it makes things a little bit more difficult. Sometimes things have to crumble and you have to rebuild later on. So it's one of those things where you want to learn how to do things the right way. And in spirituality, there isn't a lot of right or wrong, but there also kind of is. So anyways, this will all make sense in future videos. Just know that I am keeping your video topics in mind. And if you don't see them coming up next, it's not that I've forgotten about them or don't want to create them for you. It's just that I want to make sure we get some of the fundamentals out there sooner rather than later. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the Akashic Records. Now, what I want to say about the Akashic Records discussion is it is going to be about the Akashic Records, but everything in the spiritual and psychic realm is all interconnected. So what we say about the Akashic Records is also going to apply to your work with your spirit guides, with your higher self, with the deceased, with your ancestors. There's going to be a lot of things that we talk about with regards to the Akashic Records that still interrelate with everything else. So even if you're not interested in the Akashic Records specifically at this point in time on your journey, what I'm going to talk about is still probably going to apply. And what I talk about, especially at the end of this video, is going to apply as well. It's going to be things that are not just specific to this topic. It's going to be things that you can use in other realms of your spiritual work. Now, I am going to say that I have already broken my rule. Whenever I put notes together for a video, I make sure that it only fills one page so that I don't go too long, but it has somewhat gone onto the second page. So buckle up. I have a lot to share on this that I hope will be very helpful for you. Okay, so let's get into it. All right, so there is this. So whenever you look when okay, if you're going to look up the definition of the Akashic Records, what you're going to find is that the Akashic Records is essentially this huge spiritual database of information that records all of your past, present, and future thoughts, actions, feelings, intentions, all of that. So anything that you have ever thought is recorded in there. Anything that you will ever think is recorded in there. Anything you've ever felt, it's in there. Anything that you will ever feel is in there. So it's this database of all of this information that is like the invisible information. So when I mean invisible, I mean things that aren't on the physical reality, the physical plane. So when we think about the physical, we think about everything that we can see, that we can touch, that we can smell, and that we can hear out here in this realm. But the invisible is the invisible realm. It's just as real, like we've talked about. Imagination is just as real as the physical realm, but it's invisible. So our feelings are real, but they're invisible. Our thoughts are real, but they're invisible. Our intentions are real, but they're invisible. So And that's really important to know because I feel like as a society, we're starting to realize just how real this invisible realm is. Whereas before, whenever somebody was sick, we would only consider like physical symptoms or physical pain to be real pain because it was physical. We could see it. And now, society's progressing and becoming a lot more open to emotional pain and the struggles of the mind when we think about depression and anxiety and things like that. Those are all real, but they're invisible. And sometimes we have a harder time sympathizing with that because we think the invisible is not as real. So, anyways, that's how that all connects there. So, the Akashic Records essentially is about a lot of the invisible information. Now, when I think about that definition, I feel like that puts out the question of, okay, if there is this database of the universe that says that everything that has ever, anything you've ever thought, that anything you will ever thought is already recorded. Doesn't that beg the question that we don't have free will, that there's only fate? So I see the Akashic Records differently because if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see that I have a video on fate versus free will and which one is actually the right path. And at the end of the day, we live in this world where we think something is either or, left or right, male, female, Republican, Democrat, um, fate, free will. But in reality, everything is a whole, everything is contained. We are all and all is one. So fate and free will both exist, and they actually both exist in this really beautiful dance. And if you want to know more about that, you can watch that video. And so so for me, when I look at the Akashic Records, I don't see it quite the way that I've seen it written out or described, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so one thing about that is we're going to kind of transition into this. It's not fate or free will. If you think about our emotions, we can hold multiple emotions at one time. And you may think that's impossible, but we have mixtures, we have blends of emotions. We can feel really happy, but we can also feel sad. We can feel things like bittersweet. We can feel things like we can, be really happy and be so happy that we're crying and getting emotional. So we have these blends of feelings. And so, when we have these blends of feelings, each feeling can start bursting out into a new reality. Whenever we have a certain thought that we think, a certain belief, that then generates a feeling that we have that's connected to that belief. And that feeling, if it's anger, revenge, starts making us put out certain actions. And that then determines the outcome of what's going to happen going forward. But if we have mixtures of emotions, that means that we have different pathways that we can take off of that emotion. If we feel like something is bittersweet, we might become resentful because it's bitter. And then that might make us revengeful at some point and go down that path. But then there's also the sweetness side of, hey, it's bittersweet, but at least this is positive. And then maybe we start thinking like, we start feeling grateful for the positive aspect of it. And that will start getting us to act in other ways that can take us down a different path. So for me, the Akashic Records is a lot more fluid than it's just a record or just a database of everything that has been thought and will be thought and everything that has happened and will happen. I feel like it's a lot more fluid. So for me, the Akashic Records isn't just about this one linear timeline. We like to think about a psychic reading as like, what is that? What's my future going to be? How are things going to happen? What is that one linear timeline that is going to happen? But the Akashic Records is so much more than that. It's not just what you've thought and what you will think. It's every single possibility all in one. It's an even bigger database that sometimes I think we give it credit for. It's not just the past that we experienced, but all the different paths that we could have experienced based off of a decision we made at the very early stages that could have split in so many different ways. It's not just the one future we can experience, it's all of the possibilities that we can experience. And then with our minds, as we move forward in our future, we basically can only see one path. Like they all kind of collapse into the one that we see, but that doesn't mean that all the possibilities don't exist. So to me, the Akashic Records is every intention, every feeling, every action, every good deed, bad deed that we've done in the past or will do in the future. But it also is all the possibilities that aren't in the future that we're going to be moving forward in. It's all the possibilities that are available to us. All right. Okay, so I also want to talk about fate and free will with regards to psychic readings, because you may think, for some of you who have been in the spiritual realm, you may totally get all of this. For some of you who are new to the spiritual and psychic realm, you may think, well, then what's a psychic for? Like, you're a psychic, Trishna, you see the future. Doesn't that mean that there is fate? When you see something, that's fate. Again, that's all about possibilities. When somebody reads your future or when you read your own future, you're not reading the end all be all story. Yes, certain things become set in stone, and I'll explain that in a second. But most of the times, our future is actually very malleable. And so when a psychic is reading you, what are they reading? Well, what do we usually read when we're reading something? You know, we read the news, we read the books, we read stories. So when a psychic is reading you, they are reading the story that you are currently living, that you're currently telling about your past and about your present and about what you think your future is going to hold. So when a psychic is giving you a reading, they're reading your story, the internal story that you are carrying right now, and what future is going to result from that story that you are holding on to right now. So when they give you a future, it's a possibility, it's the most likely outcome based off of the story that you're telling yourself right now. And if you like the story, continue on your path. If you don't like the story that the psychic is telling you about your future, it's just a story that's based off of what you're saying right now. And you can change that at any point in time. So it's not fate. It can be if you carry on that same path, but you have the free will to change the story if you don't like how it's going to play out. And actually, my aunt, who's the one that inspired this video, you know, she has a great example. She may not know this, but so basically, I think it was like a year or two ago. I think it was a year ago. I asked her to give me a tarot reading. She's really good at tarot. She doesn't know that, but she is. She doesn't believe that, but she is. So she gave me a tarot reading, and it was really powerful. Like I had already seen what I was going to see my future, but I was still really confused, and I wanted to see what she would read because I know she's a really powerful psychic, and I just want to see, does it validate what I'm seeing? Is she picking up on something different? And so she gave me a reading, and it was really good, like on point. And if she were to ask me, if she were to look at my life right now, she would say, "Oh, my reading was wrong. Everything that I told you, Shoshana, didn't pan out." But that's not true because what she was telling me is what would have panned out. But I took that information that she gave me and I was like, hey, you know what? I want to, like, this is upsetting me. This is upsetting me. This is upsetting me. This isn't what I want. So then I basically made my peace with all of those things that I didn't like about the psychic reading. And in doing that, I released those potentials. I released that future from happening and created a better one. And that's why things are, going really well for me right now. So you have the power to create your future. A psychic reading just gives you your reading right now, based off of the energy right now. And I will say, like, I've been watching Westworld with my fiance. We're a little bit behind, so we just finished season 3. But there's something that I think Dolores says, which is humans think that they have free will, and they do, but it's really, really hard. And so I really like that line because it isn't really, really hard, but it is hard. Usually, whenever you get a reading that you don't like and you want to change it, it's difficult because in order for you to change that reality, you have to walk a different path than you've been walking. You have to think differently, you have to do different actions. So, an example of this is maybe you have a difficult relationship with your parents. So, this is actually, I'm taking this from a reading that I did for a client. She was having a really difficult time with her parents. She's an adult and everything, but just the nature of that relationship was causing a lot of issues. She has a brother who was being put in like I guess a facility because he had a lot of different issues kind of going on with him, and there's just a lot of complexity to this relationship. And the guidance that I got for her was, hey, you can change the nature of this relationship. But in order to do that, you have to meet up with your parents, you have to see them, and you have to give them a hug. And that was the last thing that she wanted to do. She was like, I don't want to see them, and I for sure am not going to give them a hug. Like, no, we have all of this anger between us. And so changing the future causes you to have to do things that you don't want to do. It causes you to have to be closer to people that you don't feel like being closer to. It causes you to have to maybe push people away that you don't want to push away. It's not easy, but it 100% is possible. And so with the Akashic Records, whenever you're tapping into it, you're tapping into all the different possibilities, but you're tapping into the one that is the most likely potential. And then it's up to the person that you're reading for or yourself to decide whether that is the version of the Akashic Records that they want to have play out. Because again, the Akashic Records holds all the versions of all the stories, every single being on this planet, human, animal, plants, other beings as well. All right. Okay. So I'm going to share a little bit more about my view of the Akashic Records. So like I said, for me, the Akashic Records holds all the potentials that are out there. And it's essentially this library of not just like the past, present, thoughts and feelings and deeds, but also every moment in time that can exist. So every moment that you can experience is there. It's kind of when we get into that whole chicken scratch thing that I mentioned in one of my lives a little bit ago, where I'm like, what did I write here? Okay, so here's the other thing. This will help with the Akashic Records and tapping into it, and also into tapping into anything that you want to do, for any kind of reading you want to read, for any kind of being you want to connect with. If you're struggling to connect to your guides, if you're struggling to connect to your higher self, to spirits, to ancestors, to the Akashic Records, it's really important that you understand that connecting to all of these things is natural for you. It is something you can already do. It is not something, again, like we talked about, it's not a luxury that is only there for the select few. You have to remember who you are. You are not a human who is trying to be spiritual. You are a spiritual being who came into a human form to have a human experience. You're a spiritual being who came to have a human experience. That means that you are spiritual first and foremost. You're the spiritual being trying to have this experience. The human part of you is just the experience. That's not really you. You are the spiritual being. So as a spiritual being, you have connection to all of the spiritual beings. You have connection to all the spiritual elements. Anything that you want to do in the spiritual realm is yours. It is who you are. You are it, and it is you. It is not something that you have to be lucky enough to have or something like that. Now, it can seem difficult to connect because, again, like I was saying before, we can sometimes carry a lot of mental rules into our spiritual work that don't serve us, that I will talk about in future videos. We're going to break those down. And also with our minds, like I was saying with the Akashic Records, it holds all the possibilities, but we can only really experience one because our minds are very focused. You may not always feel like that when you're trying to meditate and your thoughts are everywhere, but our minds are actually very focused. We can only see a select number of possibilities. That's why it's really nice when we work with guides and things like that, because they can see it all. They can give us insights that we can't see with our focused mind. And the way that we collapse time, like we've heard this concept that everything in time is happening all at the same time, or past, present, and future. But for us, we only see it in this linear fashion because, again, our minds work in this linear kind of way. So that linear kind of mentality is what can sometimes trip us up. But again, we will break down a lot of those kinds of beliefs in future videos. So that's the other thing that you need to know is if you are trying to connect to the Akashic Records, it is actually very easy and it is something that comes very naturally to you. You just have to know that. You have to remember that you're a spiritual being. And if something is tripping you up, it's not because you can't do it. It's not because it's hard. It's only because you have a belief that's in the way, and we're going to address that. And it's also really important to remember that you have access to all knowledge at your fingertips. That includes spiritual knowledge. We see that already in the physical. We see how our physical is starting to transform and become closer to the spiritual, where we get on the internet and we literally have access to all information, all thoughts that people have thought and put into words or put into a video at the touch of our fingertips. Like the fingertips, we like type with our fingers, or swipe with our fingers or whatever it is. So, okay. Okay, so when is a good time to use the Akashic Records? So whenever I'm reading for people, I don't always tap into the Akashic Records directly. Now, the Akashic Records is essentially like the universe. It's everywhere all the time, right? It has this intelligence to it. It's this library of all knowledge in every form that it can be. It's like big data, but like even better. Um, so it's kind of like the universe, but it's also like another layer of the universe. So it's like the universe and that has all the knowledge, but it's within the universe. So it's kind of what the Akashic Records is and how it fits into everything. So when is a good time to access the Akashic Records? So like I was saying before, for me, I'm not always tapping into the Akashic Records whenever I'm reading myself or reading someone else or reading a client, because the Akashic Records holds the thoughts that each person is going to be thinking or what they're doing or what actions they're going to have or what future they're going to have play out based off of their story. So I can just access the same information, some of the same information from the Akashic Records just by connecting to a person and reading that person, because essentially it's the same story that is being recorded in the Akashic Records. That does not mean that the Akashic Records aren't important, because the Akashic Records, again, is this all-encompassing information. It's not just the main possibilities that somebody is going to be moving forward with or the select few. It's like all the possibilities that are available to this person. So if you're wanting to have broader, bigger picture knowledge, that's a good time to consult the Akashic Records. Another good time to consult the Akashic Records. So sometimes situations can be very, very complicated. And in order to tap into each individual element of that situation would be a lot to read. So let me give you a few examples. If I'm reading for a corporation, like a corporate business, a corporation has tons of employees, it has partners, it has competitors, there's the economy, there's the market trends, there's the CEO and his mentality, there's all the C-levels and their mentalities, and all of that is playing into and creating the outcome of this business and where it's going to go. So sometimes you have to account for all those different possibilities. And if you were to read the CEO and then read all the C-levels and then read the market and then read the economy, whew, it'd be this full report. And that's fine, like that's great information. But if you're having like a one-on-one conversation or one-on-one reading with a CEO who wants to know about the business, it might not be sufficient to just read him or her, or it might not, or it might be too much to read all of that. It might be like a forever long session. So one way to kind of get all that information with highlights on what's really important and what's really going to play out is to tap into a more broader source. So you can use the Akashic Records to just ask about this business potential, and it'll give like all the highlights of all the important pieces of everything that is involved in that, because it is a broader connection point than maybe the CEO, because the CEO is still a mind that is limited, that can only see X number of possibilities. So what you're picking up on the CEO might not be all the options or even all the best options. So that's an example. It's like when a situation is very complicated. If you're doing a love reading for yourself or someone else, maybe there's multiple parties involved, like one of those three-party situations. You might have to read the person who's deciding between the two and how they feel about the other person and how they feel about themselves and what they want for their relationships and how they feel about the other person, and then how each person feels about the person that they both like. And all of those will have an influence because each story and how you tell it is going to influence the future that unfolds. So again, that could be a situation that's a little bit more complex where you might want to read a broader view of that will pull out the highlights of what's really important and what's really going to play out, the dominant energies of what's going on in that situation. So those are some examples. And tarot is a great example. Most of the time, I'm not using tarot for my readings. Now, if you were to look at my YouTube channel for the past 1 to 2 years, you'll notice that all of my readings that I've done on there are basically tarot readings. But if you look beyond that, I never use any kind of tools because that's just, I generally don't use tools. I end up using tarot because people generally like that. It has more of a visual, interesting effect than just me talking like right now. And also, I think people feel connected to that or maybe believe in that a little bit more. And then also for me as a reader, it was easier to just have this tarot card spread that I put out that basically would give me, I just trusted and pulled a general situation that would include all the elements instead of me having to read every single element. So it was like another way to kind of have a broader reading. So if you do tarot readings, that's a great reason to do tarot readings. It like can include all the factors without you having to hold it all in your head or like do a lot of work. So tarot readings are nice because they kind of do a lot of the legwork of psychic readings, I find. So those are some reasons, those are some situations of when you might want to use the Akashic Records. Okay, so if there's one thing that I really want you to take away from the Akashic Records and what I feel it is here to teach us, it's to teach us that, okay, what is the Akashic Records? Like I was saying, it is this being, in a way, this database, this intelligent source that holds every possibility that you will experience and all the possibilities that you want to experience. Just everything that could happen, it holds a record of that. And so the wisdom to take away from that is, remember, we are all and all is one. All is us. So we are, in a sense, the Akashic Records. Everything is. So that means that you hold within you not just the potentials of the story that you're telling that's creating your future. You hold the potentials, all the possibilities that you want in your life. You have access to all of it within yourself. You can live any reality that you want. It may not look like that with the physical reality that we live in. We get really attached to the physical, but don't get attached to that. Anything that you want to have happen exists in the Akashic Records. And because you're one with the Akashic Records, Everything that you want to have happen exists within you already, right now, and here. And so don't get too caught up in your circumstances. Don't get too caught up in the situation. Don't feel like it's physical and it can't ever change and it's always going to be this way. Why bother? This is the path I must stick with, because that becomes a story that you tell and that becomes a reality that you live. Remember that everything here, everything that you see is flexible, it's malleable. Reality is malleable. Whatever we choose to observe is what we see. Whatever we expect is what we get. So just keep that in mind. That's what, if there's anything you want to take away from the Akashic Records, that's what you want to take away, is that all the possibilities that could ever exist for you already exist for you in yourself, because you're one with the Akashic Records. Okay, so my aunt asked some questions that I think are going to be really good for anybody wanting to do any kind of spiritual psychic reading work, no matter what you're trying to connect to, Akashic Records or something else. So the first thing she asked is it easy to connect to? Is the Akashic Records easy to connect to? Yes, it is. Whenever you're connecting to anything, you don't have to know much about it. You don't have to know the name. If you're reading for a person, sometimes they'll ask you for, like, if you go to a psychic, sometimes they'll ask you to send a picture or to send your birth date. You don't really, like, the psychic doesn't really need that. Does it help? Yes. It helps them to connect to you, but that's not needed. I remember I was reading for one of my clients and he was dealing with a very, very tricky situation. He was trying to move forward with his business and he had a business partner, and I think they were trying to work with another person. And this other person, for some reason, got it in his mind that my client was cheating him. And this person was like, I'm gonna call the FBI on you. And my client was really, really scared. He's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's gonna happen. And he never told me the name of this client. Like he just sent me this in an email and I was just like, hey, let me just email your response before we chat. Like this is all going to turn out fine. He's not going to call the FBI on you. He's just really stressed because he is currently in the process of buying a house because he has a partner that he would really like to marry and he doesn't feel like he measures up, and so he needs some money and he needs to buy the house and he's just really stressed about all of that. And that is essentially, before my client and I met to actually talk about this in person, between the email and that, this other person ended up expressing that exact same thing to my client. Actually, it might have happened on the phone call while we were talking. The other person may have actually called and happened there. And my client was so surprised, like, how could you have known this? You didn't even know this person's name. You just knew that they existed. And that's the thing, is whenever you're trying to connect to anything, you don't need the name, you don't need the birthday, you don't need a picture. You just need to know that it exists. So can you connect to the Akashic Records? Yes. Now that you know that it exists, you can connect to it. And I was going to go into a little bit more detail on that, but I'll stop there. So if there's a person that you want to read, you don't have to know who they are. You can connect to them. If there is a spirit that you want to connect to, and you don't, all you know is the name, you can still connect to it. You just have to know, you just have to have a connection point. That's all. Your mind just needs to know what it needs to connect to, and then spirit will kind of do the rest. So is it easy to connect to? Yes. Just know that it exists. And how to connect. Okay. So in my second to last video, we talked about how to connect to your spirit guides. At the end of the video, I had 3 techniques. Basically, one of them was like, just converse. If you haven't seen that video, I highly suggest that you watch it because they will make a lot more sense. Like how I'm going to express it right now, you're going to be like, that will never work, but it will. Watch that video. But basically, you just want to start a conversation with it. Or you might want to tell yourself, I can't connect to the Akashic Records, but if I could, this is what I think it would tell me. And that just opens up that conversation flame, and that just releases your conscious brain, and it allows your subconscious to start connecting to it and giving you those downloads of information. So is it easy to connect to? Yes. If you're having trouble, know that you just need a connection point. You have that. And 2, go watch that video on how to connect to your spirit guides. Those exercises are all you need to start connecting to anything in the spiritual realm. Okay. The next question was, okay, is there a way to ask wrong questions whenever you are trying to tap into the Akashic Records? So yes. Now I said before, there's not a lot of right and wrong, but there also kind of is. And that's what we're going to be spending a lot of videos talking about, or like the next video, maybe I'll just do a whole video on it, is the wrong way to think about things without it being like entirely wrong. So this is like where mental rules can come into play. But anyways, okay, let's focus on this conversation, Trisha. Okay. So is there a way to ask the Akashic Records questions that aren't right, like questions that are wrong? Like, is there a wrong way to ask it? I would say yes, okay? Whenever I'm doing a reading with a client, what I like to do in the beginning is have them not tell me too much about what's going on. Like I will sometimes ask them, what is the subject? So is it like career? Is it business? Is it family? So I might ask that, but I won't want a lot of details to begin with because you want to limit the conscious brain from impeding what you are receiving. So if I already know details about the situation, then if I receive something from spirit and it's the same, I'll be like, oh, they already know that. I'm probably just thinking that because they told me that. Or if I receive something that's the opposite, I might think, oh, that's not what they said, so it's wrong, when it could be an underlying truth that the person just hasn't shared with you or hasn't realized. So whenever you're doing any kind of reading with any kind of being, physical like human or spirit or the Akashic Records, you want it to be broad. You don't want to start off too specifically. So what I like to do is, like, let's say I'm reading about um, a difficult situation at work, and I'm reading about it for myself. I'm not going to ask like, how do I solve this? Or like, what's the solution here? I'm not going to start off with that. Or like, why does this person hate me? I'm not going to start it off with specifics like that. Or like, what's the outcome of this? I'm going to start off by first saying, okay, just tell me about the situation. So it's not even a question. I don't even like to start off with questions. I think when we start asking questions, we can get very, very specific. We can start getting into yes, no questions. And I think it's, like I was saying, it's really good to be broad. So I'll just be like, I'll just connect to the topic as a whole. So yeah, I'll just connect to work or the situation at work, and I will just see what comes to me, because that way you're not limiting what you are getting answers to. Because when you limit too much with your questions, you limit what you can receive as an answer, because you've created a box within which spirit can answer, and you don't want to do that. You want to keep it broad. So one, you want to keep your questions broad. Two, you want to limit yes no questions. If a client comes to me and asks me yes no questions, I will step back and I'll be like, okay, it's yes no. It's like is if I get a question like, will this person come back, yes or no? I will step back and I'll be like, okay, let's read the relationship just as a whole between the two of you. What's going on here? And that will give me an idea of the dynamics. And then I'll read maybe the client and I'll read their partner or their ex-partner, whatever. And based off of that, you can get the answer of, is it more likely yes or no? So don't ask yes or no questions, because again, that limits, it creates a filter. And it's harder to receive those kinds of answers because spirit doesn't communicate in that kind of directness. You know, it's not just right or wrong, black or white, this or that. Spirit is more open, it's more fluid. And so you want to ask questions that allow it to answer you in that fluid way, because it's really hard to do yes or no. But if you ask that broader question, you will get enough information to be able to answer more likely yes or no. So I also want to talk about that. So whenever you are consulting the Akashic Records or a spirit guide or doing a reading for somebody or something like that, it depends on the situation, but overall, I think the best mentality to approach it with is you're not trying to get an answer. You're trying to get information upon which you can then come up with your own answer. You want to get all the little pieces that gives you all the information, that gives you the clarity that you need to use your mind to make the best decision for your life. So this goes back a little bit to when I was saying that whenever a psychic is giving you a reading, it's a reading that is based off of the story that you're telling yourself right now. So that's the story that's going to continue. And when you receive the reading, you can change the story if you don't like it. So you can change the future that you see. Where does I go with that? Hold on. Okay, so yeah. So when you're getting a reading from somebody, you're using that as not your answer, not this set in stone situation. You're using it as information that you can then use to make different choices if you don't like the reading. And that's what you want to do whenever you're consulting with most things, in most situations. You want to get the information because you want to make sure that you're balancing both the masculine and feminine energy. So the feminine energy is receiving all of this guidance, all this information, pulling that invisible information. But we are also physical beings, and the masculine and feminine both need to be part of everything that you do and part of everything that you create. So you want to pull in the spiritual information so that you have not answers, but you have information. You have the full playing field. You combine that with what you know, and then you use your mind to sort through all that information and to decide what you want to do. So you don't usually want to use spirit to decide what you should do, because that's giving away your free will. And you don't want to live completely off of fate. You want to incorporate your free will. Free will is the more masculine side of what am I going to do? And then fate and energy and information and what's playing out for you is that feminine energy of like kind of the helps you build a strategy, and then the masculine can act on that strategy or select the strategy. So the one caveat to this is, like I was saying in the spirit guide video, sometimes I'll ask, like, hey, I don't know what to wear. What's going to help me give the best impression? Or how should I show up? You can ask those kinds of questions if you would like with your guides. Like your guides, it's kind of a different connection. But still, you want to generally aim to be broad, because if you're looking for what to do in a bigger context, you want to pull in all the information and then use that information. Like living purely off of spiritual guidance is really not the way to go. Like I did an experiment where I did that for like 3 years. It's not the way to go. And living without spiritual guidance, also not the way you want to go. Really, the balance is in combining the two. And the way that you do that is use your mind to analyze your life and figure out what problems you currently have and what you want to ask about, what topics. Then you use the spiritual side and you connect with the overall topic and get as much information on it so that you can bring in clarity. And then you use that newfound clarity to help you with your mind come up with the decision. So yeah, that's that right there. Okay. So I hope that answers the question. Is it easy to connect to the Akashic Records? Yes. And I have exercises. And 2, can you ask questions in the wrong way? Yes. If you ask yes or no questions, you're not going to get the full breadth of answers that you want. And you want all the information because you make better decisions when you have more information. So keep it general, keep it broad. And then so you ask questions in a broad sense. And then once you start getting in the information, you may have more specific questions that are within this realm of the broad information that you received. Also, and then you can ask the specific questions. Also, if you ask a broad question and you get more of the playing field, you may realize that what you thought was going on isn't actually going on. Maybe you thought somebody hated you, but they don't actually hate you. They just act in certain ways, and maybe there's something going on with their family that's causing them to be this way. And that's all about to change. So now your next question is going to be different than what you thought it would have been, because you received information that has given you a different kind of context, different view that may get you to ask different questions than you would have otherwise. And so you're going to get so much more value out of your sessions if you start broad and then move more towards the specifics. And I find that a lot of times I don't even have to go into the specifics. The broad answer already answers the question, because again, like I was saying in one of my videos, I think it was a spirit guide video, your soul already knows your question. So you don't have to really ask them that specifically. So keep it broad, and your soul and your spirit kind of know, like, will also fill in the answers to some of those questions as well, but you won't be filtering them to just focus on that. They'll be able to give you so much more information. Okay, so can doubt play into your ability to connect to the Akashic Records? Yes, it can. It can connect to your ability to connect to, okay, no, let me rephrase that. Doubt will not affect your ability to connect to anything, but it will affect your ability to believe what you receive and to really be able to move forward with it. Because if you have doubt, you may receive an answer, but you will question that answer. And also, doubt kind of puts a filter around, again, what you're asking about. So yes, doubt can have a play into that. I'm going to talk about how to remove some of that doubt in another video. That is something like trusting what you receive. Like I said in the spirit guide video, is a journey. It's not necessarily something that I can like help people with in a video. I could help them a little bit with on a one-on-one situation and do some like deeper healing work with regards to that. But this is something that you can do on your own as well. It just takes a little bit of time, but I will give you a technique that I use that actually a new friend of mine made me think about, something that I actually did like 10 years ago that's really powerful. And I will also talk about in another video when you receive answers from your spirit guides that end up being incorrect and how you should approach that situation, because that's also really important. So we'll talk about the doubt situation in another video. I'll give some exercises and like some ways to work through that. So that is all that I have to share on this topic. Let me know how you enjoy this video. Let me know if it was a little bit scattered, if there was anything you need me to go a little bit deeper on, anything you need me to explain in a different way. I feel like I had a lot to share, and I just hope that I kept it linear. Because again, this is like spiritual information, but we all have to like understand it in a linear way so that we can then connect spiritually on our own. But like in the communication style, it's got to be linear so we can really understand it. Okay, anyways, that is what I have to share with you on the Akashic Records. I hope this was helpful. Again, let me know if you have any further questions or need me to explain something again a little bit differently, and I will. And yeah, let me know if you have any other topic ideas. Would love to hear them. Helps me give direction on what's useful for you guys to hear. And yeah, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next video.